Welcome to the VIGG Archive, Knowledge Without Boundaries. Today we're going to be discussing fascism, and please like and subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell for notifications. We're producing videos all the time, and shout out to my beautiful assistant Vanessa. Please also leave any comments about fascism in the box below. Any commentary would be appreciated. Thank you. The word fascism is one of the most frequently used and frequently misunderstood terms in modern political discussion. It appears in news reports, political debates, and social media, often as a label for opponents. But what did fascism originally mean? Was it simply another word for dictatorship? Is every authoritarian government fascist? And how do historians distinguish true fascism from other forms of government? In this video, we'll examine the origin of fascism in the early 20th century Italy, explore the characteristics that scholars commonly identify with fascist movements, review historical examples, and consider why political scientists continue to debate whether some modern governments or political movements share important similarities. Our goal is not to apply labels carelessly, but to understand the historical evidence and the ideas that shaped one of the most influential political ideologies of the 20th century. Origins. Fascism first emerged in Italy following First World War. Although Italy was on the winning side of the war, many Italians believed they had not received the rewards that they had been promised. The country faced high unemployment, inflation, labor unrest, and political instability. Many feared that revolution or national collapse was possible. Into this environment stepped Benito Mussolini, a former socialist who founded the fascist movement in 1919. He promised to restore national pride, strengthen the state, and end political chaos. In 1922, following the famous March on Rome, King Victor Emmanuel III appointed Mussolini as prime minister. Over the next several years, Mussolini gradually dismantled Italy's democratic institutions and established the world's first fascist government. The word fascism comes from the Italian word fascio, meaning a bundle. It refers to the ancient Roman fasces, a bundle of wooden rods bound together around an axe. The symbol represented authority and the idea that strength comes through unity. Defining fascism has challenged historians for decades because no two fascist movements were exactly alike. However, most scholars agree on several common themes. Fascism is generally understood as an authoritarian political ideology that emphasizes extreme nationalism, centralized leadership, mass mobilization of society, and the belief that the interests of the nation are more important than the rights of the individual. Unlike traditional conservatism, fascism often sought to transform society through revolutionary means. Unlike communism, it rejected class struggle in favor of national unity. It promoted obedience, discipline, and loyalty to the state, often centered around a single powerful leader. Although historians may disagree about finer details, these core principles appear repeatedly in fascist movements throughout. Characteristic 1. Extreme nationalism. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of fascism is extreme nationalism. Fascist movements teach that the nation is the highest political value and that individual interests should always come second. Patriotism exists in many countries and political systems. Fascist nationalism goes further. It often presents the nation as uniquely superior while portraying foreign nations, minorities, or internal enemies as threats to national greatness. In fascist Italy, Mussolini promised to restore the glory of ancient Roman Empire. In Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler combined nationalism with racist ideology, claiming that Germany could only regain its strength by excluding and persecuting those he considered outsiders. This extreme nationalism became one of the driving forces behind aggressive expansion and war. Characteristic 2. Authoritarian leadership. Another defining feature of fascism is the concentration of political power in a single leader. Rather than relying on independent institutions, fascist governments often encourage citizens to place their trust in one individual who claims to embody the will of the nation. This leader is frequently portrayed as uniquely capable of solving national problems. As power becomes concentrated, democratic safeguards such as independent courts, legislatures, and constitutional limits may be weakened. Loyalty to the leader is increasingly become more important than loyalty to laws or institutions. History provides many examples of this pattern, including Benito Mussolini in Italy and Adolf Hitler in Germany. Scholars also compare this characteristic with other authoritarian governments, while recognizing that not every dictatorship is considered fascist. Characteristic 3. The suppression of opposition. As fascist movements gain power, one of their first priorities is often to eliminate organized opposition. Democracies depend upon a free exchange of ideas, competitive elections, and the ability of citizens to criticize those in power. Fascist governments view these activities as obstacles to national unity. Opposition political parties may be outlawed or rendered ineffective. Journalists, labor leaders, and political rivals may face intimidation, arrest, or imprisonment. Independent newspapers are often censored or shut down, leaving the government with greater control over the information reaching the public. In Italy, Mussolini gradually outlawed opposition parties and imposed censorship. In Nazi Germany, the Reichstag fire of 1933 became the justification for emergency measures that suspended civil liberties and allowed the Nazi Party to imprison political opponents. While the methods differed, the result was the same. Organized opposition became increasingly difficult or impossible. Historians often view the suppression of dissent as one of the clear signs that a government is moving away from democratic rule. Characteristic 4. Propaganda. Another defining characteristic of fascism is the extensive use of propaganda. Propaganda is information designed to influence public opinion, often by appealing to emotion rather than careful analysis. While every government communicates with its citizens, fascist governments seek to dominate the information environment. Through newspapers, radio broadcasts, films, posters, schools, and mass rallies, governments repeat simple messages that promote loyalty to the nation and its leader. Complex political issues are reduced to slogans, while criticism is dismissed as loyalty or even treason. In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels oversaw one of history's most sophisticated propaganda systems. In fascist Italy, Mussolini also relied heavily on carefully staged public appearances, speeches, and visual imagery to project strength and unity. Modern political scientists continue to study propaganda in many forms, including state-controlled media, coordinated disinformation campaigns, and the influence of digital communication. The technology has changed, but the goal of shaping public opinion remains an important subject of the study. Characteristic 5. Militarism. Fascist movements frequently glorify military strength, discipline, and national sacrifice. Military service is presented not simply as a necessity for defense, but as a source of national pride and identity. War itself may be portrayed as a means of restoring greatness, expanding national power, or demonstrating courage. Under Mussolini, Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935 as an effort to build a new empire. Nazi Germany pursued aggressive territorial expansion that ultimately led to the Second World War. These campaigns were justified through nationalistic rhetoric and promises of restoring historical greatness. It is important to note that supporting a strong military does not in itself make a government fascist. Many democratic nations maintain powerful armed forces. Historians instead examine whether militarism becomes closely linked with authoritarian leadership, expansionist goals, and the suppression of democratic institutions. Characteristic 6. Scapegoating. Throughout history, political movements have often blamed complex social and economic problems on particular groups of people. Fascist movements frequently elevate this practice into a central political strategy. Rather than acknowledging that economic downturns or political instability usually have many causes, fascist leaders often identify a convenient enemy. These may include ethnic or religious minorities, immigrants, political opponents, or other groups portrayed as responsible for the nation's difficulties. The most horrific example occurred in Nazi Germany, where anti-Semitism became official government policy and ultimately contributed to the Holocaust, in which approximately 6 million Jews along with millions of other victims, were murdered. Scapegoating simplifies complicated problems by offering a simple target for public frustration. Historians consider this one of the most dangerous characteristics of fascist movements because it can encourage discrimination, persecution, and violence. Characteristic 7. Control of institutions. Finally, fascist governments often seek to reshape the institutions that provide checks on political power. Independent courts, civil servants, educational systems, police agencies, and election administrators all play important roles in maintaining constitutional government. While these institutions remain independent, they can limit the political power of leaders. Fascist movements typically attempt to bring these institutions under title political control. Schools may emphasize ideological instruction. Courts may become less independent. Government employees may be expected to demonstrate political loyalty. Elections, if they continue to exist, may become less competitive or less meaningful. Political scientists often describe these developments as democratic backsliding. Although not every country that experienced democratic backsliding becomes fascist, the weakening of independent institutions is widely recognized as an important warning sign that democracy itself may be at risk. By examining history, we can see how fascism developed into practice. Although no two governments were identical, they share many common characteristics. Italy under Benito Mussolini was the first fascist state. Mussolini centralized power, weakened democratic institutions, censored the press, and promoted an aggressive form of Italian nationalism. His government became the model for later fascist movements. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler shared many of these characteristics but added an extreme racial ideology. Hitler's government combined authoritarian rule, propaganda, militarism, and the systematic persecution of Jews and other groups. These policies ultimately led to World War II and the Holocaust, one of history's greatest crimes against humanity. Other movements adopted elements of fascism as well. The Ustaše regime in Croatia and Romania's Iron Guard incorporated many fascist ideals, while Spain's Falange shared ideological similarities. Historians continue to debate the extent to which Francisco Franco's dictatorship should be classified as fully fascist or as a different form of authoritarian government with fascist influences. These examples remind us that fascism was not confined to one country. It appeared in different forms, shaped by each nation's history and political circumstances. Modern debates. The word fascism is frequently used in modern political debate, but historians and political scientists generally use the term much more cautiously. Many scholars argue that truly fascist governments require a specific combination of characteristics, including revolutionary nationalism, authoritarian leadership, mass political mobilization, and the willingness to use violence in pursuit of national transformation. As a result, scholars often describe modern governments using other terms such as authoritarianism, competitive authoritarianism, illiberal democracy, or right-wing populism, depending on the evidence. Some researchers have argued that certain aspects of governments led by figures such as Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban share important similarities with fascist politics, while others believe different labels are more accurate. In the United States, some scholars have argued that elements of Donald Trump's rhetoric or aspects of the MAGA movement resemble fascist or authoritarian politics, while other scholars reject the fascist label and instead describe the movement as populist or nationalist. There is no scholarly consensus on these questions. The disagreement illustrates an important point. Identifying similarities does not necessarily mean that two political movements are identical. Historical comparisons require careful political analysis and an understanding of important differences as well as similarities. Can democracies become authoritarian? History demonstrates that democratic governments can gradually lose their democratic character. This process rarely happens overnight. Instead, democratic institutions may weaken over time through a series of small changes. Independent courts may lose authority, journalists may face increasing pressure, political opponents may be portrayed as enemies of the nation rather than legitimate competitors. Citizens may begin losing confidence in election or other constitutional institutions. Political scientists often refer to this gradual process as democratic backsliding. It has occurred in various countries throughout history, although the outcomes have differed significantly. Understanding these warning signs is not about predicting the future. Rather, it helps citizens recognize how democratic institutions function and why preserving them requires ongoing public participation and respect for constitutional principles. Lessons from history. Why does studying fascism still matter today? The example is simple. History provides valuable lessons about how governments change, how political movements gain support, and how democratic institutions can either survive or fail. Studying fascism encourages us to examine evidence carefully, question simplistic explanations, and appreciate the importance of independent courts, a free press, competitive elections, and a peaceful transfer of political power. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that no society is automatically protected from authoritarian tendencies. Democracies remain strong only when citizens remain informed, engaged, and committed to a constitutional government. Conclusion. Fascism was one of the most defining political ideologies of the 20th century. It emerged from a unique historical context, but many of its characteristics continue to be studied because they reveal how governments can concentrate power and weaken democratic institutions. Although scholars often disagree about whether a particular modern government should be described as fascist, they generally agree that understanding history provides valuable tools for evaluating political developments in any era. The purpose of studying fascism is not to apply labels casually or to win political arguments. It is to understand how historical events unfolded, why democratic institutions matter, and what lessons history offers for the future generations. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this presentation, please consider subscribing to the VIGG Archive, Knowledge Without Boundaries. Our channel explores history, literature, science, and government through carefully researched educational presentations designed to inform, encourage curiosity, and inspire lifelong learning.